You startled me. In this video, I make some holes, I wear a toque, and do some blockages like the Chevy S10 build Facebook group blocked me after only one post, which was this. Welcome back to my 1996 GMC Sonoma Minitruck build, and in the last episode, we went a little bit backwards. Had to take off the suspension again, but I tied up some loose ends. Got everything painted that I need to get painted, and started working on the firewall. And if you missed that episode, check it out with the link above. And for this episode, you can see it's really cold. I'm wearing a toque. Actually, I'm interested in what you guys call this thing. I've heard it even called a toboggan down in Tennessee. So leave a comment with what you call a toque where you live. Before we get started, I want to do a quick PSA. And that's really to say that what I do in this video might not be the best way, but it's my journey of learning how to do some of the things I'm about to do. I truly believe the best way to learn is to watch videos, read things on the internet, but then try it yourself. And once you've tried it, go back to those videos and you'll actually get a better understanding of what they're saying and doing. So this video really is my learning journey on how to do new things that I haven't done before. And if you enjoy this type of content, please like, subscribe, leave a comment, and you can also follow me on Facebook and Instagram, and those links are in the description below. We'll be picking up where we left off, which was figuring out where to drill a hole for this brake line mount. And also, I'm going to have a fuel line mount somewhere around here, so I have to drill a hole for that. Now, I've been thinking, and I mentioned last episode, I'm not quite happy with the way I routed this. I'm sure there's a reason why, and to figure it out, I have to reassemble everything, and that just doesn't make sense to do right now. And if I route it a little bit differently, I might not need to actually mount it here. But I may need to, and I might get into a situation where if I don't drill a hole, put in the engine, I realize I have to take the engine out to drill a hole. Or if I do drill a hole, realize I don't need it, then I have a hole there that I got to fill in, and ideally would be to weld that back up, but I'd have to take everything out again to make that happen. So I'm a bit of a catch-22. So what I'm thinking I'm going to do is I'm going to do a bit of a punch here where I think it needs to be, enough that I will see a dent on the other side, very small, and worst case I could drill from the inside out, and then I'm just hopeful that I'll be able to get a bolt on it afterwards. So that's what I'm thinking I'm going to do over here. And for the fuel line, I have it marked out. I'm just going to drill a hole and making sure it's the right size and probably put a riv nut in there. One more thing is putting in the passenger side front brake line. I can't remember if I want to mount something here. And it's not fully attached. I still need to do that. So I'm also going to attach it as best as I can and see if it comes really close to here. If it does, I might also put a mount over here, and that I'll drill because I know where I want it to go. I have the heater off so it's not too loud, but that means I got to bundle up because it's freezing. Anyway, I figured I want to start with this for no other reason other than I'm just prolonging having to drill holes on the other side. Yeah, that's definitely tight. I just gotta tighten this one up, but it's definitely on there.
I finished tightening the passenger brake line with the clamps I had in place, and add the braided line to make sure that the hard line was in the right spot.
It's close. I think with the vibration, it will hit. I think getting another one here makes sense. So the good thing about putting it into this panel is this is blocking a hole, so there used to actually be a pass-through. So if I use a riv nut, it's not going to interfere with any of the dash or under dash components because there was actually something big on the other side.
Once I knew where to put the clamp, I followed the same steps as I did in the previous episode. Mark it, center punch, center drill it to size, deburr it, prime it, squeeze in the riv nut, And lastly, test it.
There, way better.
Time to move on to the driver's side.
Now, where do I want to put this? Or maybe put this somewhere here. And I need to check if this will interfere with the brake pedal.
With the brake pedal in and knowing roughly where the riv nut would stick out, I push the pedal towards the firewall.
Oh, not even close. Yeah. I could drill there if I need to.
And we're in the clear.
Well, I loosely put together the suspension and the wheel and tire because I wanted to see and remind myself why I routed the brake lines like I did. And one thing I was originally thinking of is, could I put the brake line down here? And I think it's because the upper A-arm is going to interfere in this location. And even when I bring it down, it's going to hit the frame. So which is probably why I moved it this way. Now, having attached here actually helps create some rigidity. So I think that is a good mounting point. So I am going to go ahead and put a riv nut down there. I am going to redo the brake line anyways so that I have this bracket on the side, considering I can't drill into the frame from here because of the cab. Now, unfortunately, that doesn't ease all of my concerns. This is with the tire completely down now, which is as if the truck was at its highest point. And if I rotate the tire, it hits the brake line. Now, when I made these brake lines, I did have the steering assembled. So it is possible that the steering wouldn't come out this far, which is why it's hitting now. But again, don't really like it. So I still may route this a little different. I haven't figured that out, but I still want that mounting point on the cab, down over there. So at least I have that, and then I'll figure out how to reroute it, and I'll reroute it once I have the steering back on so I can see what is the maximum steering angle that the tire really is going to hit, and will I hit the brake line as it sits now.
Time to pull everything apart. First the brake lines, then the master cylinder. The hole for the fuel line clamp is the same size, so I'll put in a riv nut for both the brake line and the fuel line mounts. It's the same process, so let's speed through it.
The next thing I want to do is address this gaping hole. I'm not going to have air conditioning. I'm actually not going to have a heater. Maybe later on I'll do an under dash type heater, and all I need is to drill some holes for the heater hoses to go through. But at this point in time, I don't need this. Although I do have some wiring that is going to go through kind of this area, so I can't close it off completely. I'll need to have some way to pass through those wires and the connector. Now, I could weld this up, get a plate. That's what I did over here, but this is also one of my first times doing it, and it didn't turn out well. There are some gaps. I used, I think, maybe even 24 gauge here, maybe 20 gauge. I'd probably use 18 gauge, go really slow not to warp anything. But what I'm thinking of doing instead, since I have these holes here, is I'm going to measure these holes and design a plate that I could put on top. I'll have to cut off the lip anyways, and then I could put a plate that's fairly flush. Now this surface is not flat at all. I think even when I welded this part here, just to give some clearance for the tire, I could feel that it's bowed. So I'll still have to have with the plate some sort of material to just cover it. Maybe some foam or something just to kind of contour to this. If I really wanted to, I could try hammer and dolly, but I don't think it's worth it for something that's barely going to be seen by people. So next up, I'm going to measure off where the distance is between each other of these bolt holes. And the way I'm going to measure the holes is with a laser. And you can see I set it up so that The top hole over there will become my datum, and then I'm going to measure each of the additional holes based off of the distance from the vertical and the horizontal line.
I start off using the laser to measure the holes, and I was going to draw it out in Fusion 360, make a template, and then cut it out of metal. I'd finished measuring, and there are two other areas I want to blank off, but using a laser wouldn't work. This is when I decided to simplify things with cardboard. But first, I need to remove that lip. For that job, I use an oscillating saw. Time for the cardboard.
You can get fancy, but sometimes just some cardboard is all you need.
I use a punch to mark out the holes. I had cut the outside edge to match the contour of the firewall, and then I mark off where I want the edges to be. After cutting it out, I rounded the edges and tested the template. Off camera, I made the templates for the other two areas. I roughly cut out some 18 gauge metal for the plates. I must have been half asleep when I marked these out because there's no way I could cut these vertical lines with this tool. So out comes the cutoff wheel. Now I can transfer the templates to steel, fine tune it with the flat disc, then strain the edges with the DA sander. Now the holes, punch and drill, but it doesn't go to plan.
So let's see if this fits. I know the drill walked on one of these holes, so I am assuming that I'm going to have to make it larger so that it'll fit. I do have the original hardware for the blower, so that's what I'm going to use. Well, 2 of 4, that's not good. Okay, so I'm going to have to drill it larger here and over here. It's about halfway through the hole. I'm probably going to make these holes a little bit bigger too, so it can shift a little bit. Then I have a little bit more play. But these will probably have to be up quite a bit.
Well, this didn't go to plan at all. I try slotting the two holes by drilling a second one close by, but it slips, and when it gets going it jams into the first hole. So I bring out the Dremel, and it keeps on getting caught shredding itself. I then use a drill like an end mill, which slowly works. I try the Dremel again, moving slowly, but it's a fail. But there's a bit of a slot, so I test fit it. 3 bolts in.
Almost there.
Test it one last time.
But that's good.
And I also test the other 2 plates.
So I finished covering up some holes, but I still need to make a couple more. The first one is over here. So I put back the throttle control module, and this is the plug for the pedal. Since it's drive-by-wire, I now need to get this to the pedal. I don't have too much room here, but I think I know where I want to put it. This is where the brake master is going. This is the clutch master. So somewhere around here is where I think I want to drill a hole. The challenge I'm going to face is that this plug is fairly big, and to drill a hole big enough to fit this plug, but then small enough that it'll seal around the loom is going to be difficult. So what I'm going to do is have a hole and a grommet that's going to fit the loom, and I'll de-pin it and put this into the cab. If I need to take out the engine or anything, that's fine because it's all going to be connected to the cab, so that's not going to be a problem. And in the future, if I want to, I could put a bulkhead connector here in the same place where I'm going to drill now. And the other hole I need to drill is on the other side where the blower hole cover is. There is a connector that goes from the engine loom into the inside cabin wiring, but there might be another spot that I can actually fit that wiring, so I don't want to cut something and realize I didn't need to. I'll deal with the hole that will go through here or another place once I get the engine back into the frame. Yeah, just under 1/2 inch, we'll call it 1/2 inch loom. Let's see what I have. Yes, 1/2 inch or, yeah, so the only grommet that I have with a 1/2 inch hole is this one here. So that needs to be 21 and 30 seconds. I don't think I have a hole drill that size. So that's gonna be my next challenge. For this grommet to work, it's calling for a 21 30-second hole. The size a little bit smaller than that is 5/8. But either way, I don't have a 5/8 drill or a 5/8 hole saw. So let me look online to see how much one is and if it's worth it. Otherwise, I could maybe go up to a 1/2 inch and buy a different grommet that is a 1/2 inch OD and 1 inch ID. The good news is that I have my 5/8 hole saw. The bad news is that this is my clutch pedal mount and the wiring needs to pass in between this area. But when I put this onto the Firewall, it's interfering with these 2 points. And that's because the tub that I built, I must have added some more material than I thought, and that's where it's interfering. So before I can figure out where I'm going to put the hole, I just got to get rid of these corners so that I could actually mount this back onto the Firewall.
I made some slight adjustments to the clutch pedal mount, then I marked and started to drill from the inside out. What I should have done was drill the pilot hole, then move to the outside of the cab to cut the hole. The hole saw started walking and made the pilot hole bigger, compounding the amount it was off. So I stopped and came up with plan B. I had a 1/2 inch drill and that's what I started with. Then marked the OD of the grommet onto the Firewall, and using some math, I estimated that the edge of the grommet to the edge of the hole should be about 100 thou. So I marked that off, and to enlarge the hole, I opted for a conical sanding drum, which surprisingly worked well. Then a quick test fit of the grommet, and I was good to go.
Now that we have this hole, I get to move on to a part that I'm actually excited about, which is cleaning this Firewall. Now, normally I'll clean off the rust first before I actually wash it, but because it's so dirty and some of the rust is probably hidden from the dirt, I'm just gonna wash it, remove the rust, wash it again, put on some rust converter, rinse and wash that, and then we'll move on to another fun step.
I'm using warm water with car soap to begin with, then rinse it off with some warm water and dry it off. There were a few spots that had some built up grease, and I used some degreaser and brushes to get that off. Now time for the wire brush. To make sure all the rust won't come back, I clean the bare metal and brush on some rust converter. The next day I come back and wash the Firewall again, first with some degreaser, and then I use the brush with some car soap and hot water, and rinse it off, then dry. Lastly, to make sure there's no residue, I clean it off with some panel prep.
Off camera, I did some masking. I thought that'd be just boring watching me play with tape and some paper. Anyway, I have everything I believe that I don't want paint on masked up. I just have a tarp down here just to make sure nothing falls onto the frame. And then anything near the edge here, I could just hold up some cardboard if need be. So my plan right now is first cover up all the bare metal. So I'm just gonna use a self-etching primer, get that covered, and then I'll bring you back for the next step.
I start off with a very light coat to promote adhesion, then a slightly heavier coat, and then one last coat. After the primer was dry, I wanted to test out my new blocks. However, with the Firewall not being flat and having a bunch of contours, it didn't work out as I had thought it would, but I did my best. My goal is to scuff everything with 180 grit, so I revert to using my fingers to get into every corner that I could. This took me a long time, and I probably could have done a better job if I continued at it for a little bit longer.
You just saw me scuff the paint, and afterwards I blew it off and used some panel prep to clean it. And my plan is to actually spray color on all of it. Now I do have to hit it again with some primer, but before I do that, I'm going to do something for the first time I've ever done, which is use some body filler. In this case, yes, it is Bondo. I did get the professional version of that, I don't know if it's actually going to make a difference. I know there's some better products out there, but it's a lot of money and I don't know if this is something that I'm going to do. I want to try, and I figure doing it on the Firewall, especially when everything, all the accessories are on it, you won't see any of the bad work that I'm about to do. But it'll also give me a gauge to see if this is something that I want to learn, a skill that I want to learn and continue to get better at, so that I can actually do body work that's on the outside where everybody's going to see. So this basically is going to be my test bed. I'm not going to put body filler everywhere. I'm going to focus on the panels that I welded in. This is really warped and you can see a little bit of a ridge here. So again, I'm just wanting to make it slightly more better and get a feel of what it's like to use some body filler.
This is my first time smelling body filler and it's not enjoyable. And the texture is awkward to work with. Maybe because it's cold in the garage.
This stuff is goopy. Well, first time for everything.
I don't know how much hardener to use.
Start with that. This will be a disaster, but that's how you learn. It's looking pretty uniform. I also wasn't expecting the smell of this stuff. Here goes nothing.
I watched a few videos on how to use body filler, but it was different than I expected. Worst case, I just have to sand it off, and at this point I just keep on going.
I think it's hardening up. So I think it's starting to harden up a bit, so I'm going to take a break, clean up everything in terms of the board and the spreader, let it sit and see how it looks. I let it sit for a bit. I even started to sand a little bit, and over here it's not too bad. I'll have to do a little bit of touch up anyway. And then here where I was trying to do a little bit of contouring, you kind of see that didn't come out so well. I'm going to try it again. I might as well. And then in terms of applying, I was getting better. It's a lot smoother over here. Still need to sand this part down, but I think I have a better sense of what it takes to put on body filler. The body filler I'm using seems really thick. I'm sure there's thinner products out there that would be a little bit easier to manage, but it's what I have. It's what I'm going to work with. So I'm going to continue to work over here, get a little bit of that lip, and then maybe a little bit over here, and then I'll also come back and try to get a better contour over here, and then skim a little bit more just to smooth it out, and then also smooth out over here.
I had forgotten to turn on the camera before adding more filler to the driver's side, so here's me adding filler on the passenger side in hyperspeed. Once everything was dry, I attempted some more block sanding, and I spent 40 minutes just using the paper to get into the areas that the block was missing. I blew away the dust, and this was the result.
Off camera, I did some additional cleaning as well as additional masking, and I also lifted this side of the cab up just to give me a little bit more clearance from the shock tower. My next step is to prime the whole Firewall. I'm going to give it a few coats, let it dry, sand it, and then determine if I need to add a few more coats before we get into the next step, which is going to be the color.
I start off with a light dusting of self-etching primer, then move to 2 medium coats, letting it flash 3 minutes in between. I ran out of primer, so I went to pick up some more self-etching, and I also got a can of high build primer. I added 1 more coat of the self-etch, then 2 of the high build primer, letting it flash 5 minutes in between coats. After letting it dry for 30 minutes, I scuff it all with 400 grit. There's a couple of areas I broke through the primer, so I touched them up. I decided that I should also paint the cover plates I made. And I start off with scuffing it with 80 grit. And I started spraying it with the self-etching primer and realized I should have used 180 grit instead. So out comes the DA sander with 180 and I start over. Now for the self-etch primer again. And then the high build primer.
I just finished hitting everything with 400 grit sandpaper and wiping it down clean. So my next step is to add color on this, which I'm nervous about, but also excited about. And I got a couple of cans mixed up. Yes, I'm using a RATTLE can, but it is the factory color, which is WA9018, which is radar blue metallic. Yes, it's going to be more purple than blue, but that's the name of the paint. Once I lay the color down, I'm going to wait a few hours and then hit it with some 2K clear. And because it is 2K, once you activate it at the bottom, then it only has a shelf life of 48 hours. So I need to make sure that I'm ready to paint this fully and clear it. And that's why I also have the cover panels. I'll have those ready and clear those as well, because afterwards, whatever's left over is going to get properly recycled. So let's get some color on.
As you can see, I'm starting a bit of a pattern when laying down paint. Starting with the light dusting, then moving over to a light to medium coat, the spray can comes with 2 nozzles and the first coat was with the wide nozzle. I was worried about the coverage being too spread out, so I switched to the narrow nozzle for the last 2 coats, but that introduced some paint splattering. I tried dabbing it away with the shop towel and that helped, but it does continue to be a problem.
Why is it doing that?
I'm struggling to know what I'm doing wrong to cause this splattering.
It's time for the clear. It says shake for 2 minutes, pop it, shake for 2 minutes. Let's get at it. Point to no return.
Lastly, a couple of coats of clear with about 10 minutes flash time.
And we're done the Firewall. And I have to say, the color looks pretty good. I didn't know what to expect using a RATTLE can, but definitely for a Firewall that is going to have pieces on it, the engine in front of it, it looks fairly good. Now, there are areas that can be improved upon, such as where I put body filler, I could have went over with a finer sandpaper because you could actually see the scratches come through. And maybe even another coat before sanding it down might even help that. And the second thing is the paint splattering. Now it's not too visible on the Firewall, but one of the panels, it's really noticeable. But luckily, that's going to be hidden by the dash, so I'm not too worried about that one. Anyway, I'm going to wrap things up here. If you liked what you watched, please like, subscribe, leave a comment, and we'll see you next time.